Okay, ready?
I'm ready.
What's up, guys? I'm Lionel the Builder, back again with another episode of Surviving Tech Podcast. I'm super excited today to introduce the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office of City Norfolk. Actually, our first ever, Miss Aleea Slappy Wilson.
Hi,
Round of
everyone.
applause, crowd.
Hi.
So please let us know, how did you become the city's first DE&I officer?
Yep, it's a pretty interesting story because it wasn't something I sought out, right? And I think the best opportunities come when you're busy just doing good work, and so that's exactly what was happening. My background, I'm really an economic development practitioner, right? Like that is the lens that I come to the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion with. And so I was working in economic development here in the city of Norfolk, really leading all of our efforts to support the start and growth of small women and minority-owned businesses. And we were having this large meeting on the 24th floor of the Dominion Tower, talking about, in many ways, concentrated poverty in Norfolk. And it was an uncomfortable meeting because we were sitting so high in the sky, actually, right, on the 24th floor, having conversations about communities, and having it about someone versus having it with someone is totally opposite of how we want to do things. And so spoke up that day, and kind of like spoke up at a time where I wasn't sure if me speaking up was going to be necessarily a positive thing or met with like positivity, right? But still felt the discomfort of sitting there and not saying something. So I had to say something. And so I spoke up in that meeting. And somehow whatever I shared, or kind of like what I stood up and shared in that time, got back to our then city manager, who had his assistant reach out to me and said, the city manager wants to speak with you. And in my head, I naturally thought like, oh, this is it. I'm going to lose my job. Like, and didn't think that I have to go all the way to the city manager for me to lose my job. But like, okay, this is, I spoke too much. I spoke at the wrong time, right? Thinking it was something like that. And instead, our then city manager just started asking me questions and asked me what did I think about the culture of Norfolk, and asked me to be very candid about what I thought about a number of things. And several months later, kind of shared that there was a new effort to really focus on diversity and inclusion in the city of Norfolk. And something that's important to share is that this was in 2019. So at this point, George Floyd hadn't been murdered. At this point, we didn't have a COVID epidemic in our country, right? Those things that were this watershed moment that led to a lot of places starting to do the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, that stuff hadn't happened yet, right? So we weren't having a knee-jerk reaction to things going on in the world. It was just our then city council and our then city manager who said, we need someone who wakes up every day challenging systems. Someone who wakes up poking holes at what we do. And so that was because I spoke up at that meeting that one time. That was a kind of, I guess, me poking holes at how we were doing things. And ever since then, that's been the work that I've been doing.
That's amazing. I love those times, and I've had a few of those moments of being scared, but then feeling the need, like, no, I actually have to say this.
Like, I can't even like exist and not say what I need to say, right? It was like that, like, oh, I have to, like, no matter, and you don't, in that moment, you don't think about an outcome or a consequence, right? Because you just know
I'm here.
The bigger consequence is me not saying anything and me being able to sit with myself. And so,
like, I made it here.
Here we are.
And I gotta talk.
I gotta say what I have to say.
So, can you share what it was? Do you remember what it was?
That piece, those details, I don't want to necessarily share just because of just the nature of the work that
Understandable.
Yeah.
But, and I can feel the thing, like, you rather be boots on the ground than high up in the sky.
Yeah, like, if we're gonna do the work of deconcentrating poverty or do the work of creating opportunity, let's do it alongside people. And so, and that is the work that we do as a city now, and that's something I feel really proud of.
What are some of the things that you guys do along those lines?
Yep. I would say one of the big things that we do is really look at how we spend money as a city. And so it's one thing to say that we care about communities and then not spend our dollars or not make it available for us to spend our money with the communities we say we care about, especially when we know that there is such a great need for economic mobility, right? And so one of the big things that we've been doing for the past several years, since 2020 really, is really looking at economic inclusion and recognizing that with such a large budget, so much money that the city has to spend on goods and services and things that we need for our residents and businesses, we know that we need to make sure that we are spending it with small businesses. We need to make sure that we're spending it with minority-owned businesses. We need to make sure that we're spending it with women-owned businesses. And so the work that we started in 2020 with our economic inclusion plan and procurement policy really solidifies that in the city of Norfolk, we are going to put our money where our mouth is, literally, and spend our dollars with small businesses, with women-owned businesses, and with minority-owned businesses.
Wow.
And I want to add to that, it's not just a matter of spending money with certain businesses. It's also preparing those businesses for growth, right? And preparing them to really have the economic growth that pushes them to other levels, right? It's not just enough for someone to be successful because they got a contract in the city of Norfolk.
Right.
That's awesome. I think that's really great. But what's really awesome is that you start to help a business scale so that they then can do business with other folks, right? Or they can do business in the private sector, or they see the other opportunities or other industries that are complementary to the thing that they started in business with. There's so much there to explore beyond us just making ourselves available to spend our money with those firms. And so it's really all of that. And so at the core of what a lot of what we're doing in diversity, equity, and inclusion is creating economic opportunity. And I don't think you do this work well without thinking about economic opportunity.
I love that. That's beautiful. And as a person who is around a lot of small business owners, is a small business owner myself, I've never even considered the city spending money at my business.
And we want to change that, right? Now, granted, there are certain things that it's difficult for the city to buy, right? We still have to be a good steward of taxpayer dollars. But there's a lot of stuff we're already going to purchase. And so why shouldn't we be buying it with small firms, with women-owned firms, with minority-owned firms? And so part of the work for us is helping folks to see, the city wants to be your next best customer. We want to be your customer. We want to buy with you. And so that's changing the narrative from what it's been historically, not just here, but everywhere.
Okay, so something like this is going to help with that.
Yes.
For certain.
Yes.
So other than this, is there a group you could join, or a thread, or a group chat, something where...
Well, so there may be a lot of public chats and groups. A lot of what we're doing is internal to the city, but folks ask me all the time, are you doing this in the community? Some of the things we've talked about, we've had an internal book club where we've had discussions around all types of topics related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we've been kind of thinking more, especially in our current climate, how do we bring that into the community space? Or how do we help train folks so that they can lead the efforts in the community space? One of the things that we do is a leadership development training that we call Equity Ambassadors, right? And the idea behind Equity Ambassadors is we're trying to equip you so that if we're never around, you're the one that's advocating on behalf of the community, on behalf of someone who doesn't have a voice. You're saying, wait, we didn't invite so-and-so to the table. We don't have the perspective of young adults. We don't have the perspective of single moms. We don't have the perspective of the elderly, whoever it is, right? And it's equipping folks so that they can ask those questions and so they can challenge the systems that exist in their own life and especially in their neighborhoods, right? And so that's something that we're doing internally with city staff. And so we've been thinking about how do we bring equity ambassadors outside of the city of Norfolk with Team Norfolk and its employees and bring that to the community so that the community too can learn how they can be an ambassador on behalf of making their neighborhoods, making their city everything that they want it to be.
Another thing that people often don't think about, that you actually do have some type of power and agency, can raise your hand, can attend the meeting, can make your voice heard.
Absolutely. I mean, we are in a day and age where folks recognize in some spaces that there is room for their voice, but I still think when we think about local government, folks don't always see themselves as being an important part of the process outside of election day, right? There's so much that is happening in local government that's just happening on a Tuesday night when someone comes up to the podium, gives their address, and takes their 3 minutes and makes a comment about what they see as an injustice or a problem or a situation right there in their neighborhood. And so we want to challenge more folks to use their civic duty to really speak up, because I'm telling you, the magic happens at the local government level, right? The most impactful piece of the political pie is happening right here in your local neighborhood.
Yeah, and it affects you right away.
Directly.
We're so worried about the global scale that we forget sometimes our neighborhood. So what does that look like for a person? Like, is there a calendar we could find somewhere?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And not just for the city of Norfolk, just keeping in mind that your viewers and your listeners might not just be in Norfolk, but they may be in the rest of Hampton Roads or anywhere. Every city, every municipality is having council meetings, right? And that those calendars are available online. That is like the law for us to make that public information so
True.
you know ahead of time, right?
True.
There's even information on there on how you can sign up so that you can speak even the day of, right? So it's not like you have to plan weeks ahead. Like there's even an opportunity for you to decide, hey, you know what? I am going to be available this evening. So by a certain time on that Tuesday when we have a council meeting, you can register to speak, right? And so we want to encourage folks to use their voice in that way.
Not to put you on the spot, but can you think of an
put
example?
Me on the spot. Okay.
Is there an example you can give of one of these meetings where somebody said something that then something happened afterwards?
I mean, it's literally, I feel like every meeting.
Every time.
Yeah, I mean, we have a council and we have a city that's just very responsive, right? So it's not like residents are coming up and saying things and it's like falling on deaf ears, right? Like there is that follow-up that happens. And so as leadership in the city, we're watching council meetings, right? If there are things related to the work that I do, I'm taking notes on that, right? And finding out from our city leadership, how do we want to move forward on it? So it's not a matter of like, oh, someone just said it and it just, and it just went away.
Okay. And then I can just imagine somebody, like if you were to bring a certain number of people, eventually y'all could be known as, city movers and shakers, or just to inspire people in your city. As I have heard this before from my partner is actually sits on the chair of the Gen Z Commission.
Okay.
Yeah, and they just interviewed Michael Bellucci, and we're talking to him, and he told them that a lot of times it's just a matter of the people who do show up are not in line with the general interest of the majority. Like, like sometimes the more passionate people who may be the minority who don't want something to happen can go show up, and their little 10 people will make such a big impact. Whereas if younger people have understood that we get about 15 of us and we show up,
the power of the collective.
And it's not even that many, but the thing is, we're not at the meetings, so these things don't even happen. These things that you guys may know, or the city may know, is really what everyone wants. But are you stuck to deal with who's there in the room? In that sense, you can't necessarily make moves against the people who are actually attending these meetings.
And so I will say the other side of it, right? Because one of the things we realized, and this is really going to the equity side of things, it's acknowledging that folks aren't always in the room. So finding other ways to ask folks. So I don't know the frequency of it, but we now have a resident survey that we're sending out to folks, because we know sometimes younger folks or different demographics of folks aren't coming out to city council meetings, right? But your voice should still be considered when we're making decisions around your own community, right? And so I think it's also helpful for folks to know there are a number of different ways to engage that also go beyond a Tuesday night, right? And so look out for those other ways too. So when you get the email about the survey, or your aunt sends it to you, or somebody that you know said, oh, there's this survey out, don't just ignore that, right? Like that information is being used to determine how we move forward as it relates to everything we do in the city, how we spend money. It's all tied to the responses of residents right here in the city. And so I think folks think sometimes that opportunities like that aren't going to be used to make things better, or it's just like a check the box. And so we aren't doing check the box. We are doing like, no, we want to hear from folks, and that is going to determine how we move forward.
Okay. What can you speak to some of the initiatives that you have participated in, either in the past, present, or future?
So I would say a big one has been our commitment to spending. That is a huge one. And so looking at where we spend our dollars, whether that's through contracts or just from a purchase card. Someone in the city department has a credit card and they can make purchases for things that are needed in that department. And we put something in place now where you usually have to get 3 quotes. But if you go with a SWAM business, then you don't have to get the 3 quotes. It's encouraging that department to spend more with SWAM businesses,
Small
women and minority-owned businesses.
Wow.
And so we're trying to encourage that. So we're putting all of these things in place that make it easier for the people who do the purchasing to directly spend with your business versus going to the big box store to buy everything because they think it's easier, and not knowing that they may get a better quality, a personal customer service experience by working with some of the other firms. And so a big part of our work is tied to that. I would say other initiatives on the other side of that are all of our internal work tied to making sure that our employees are equipped with the skills and tools they need to really advocate for themselves and advocate for others around really being an equitable, welcoming, and inclusive Norfolk. And so I would say that's another big piece. And then another part of our work is tied to accessibility. Something we often don't think about is all the forms of accessibility, right? Someone might be thinking, oh, there's a ramp outside, so now this space is accessible. We're not thinking about language accessibility, right? And if information is our greatest currency, and you are now living in the city of Norfolk, and English is a language that you know, but you might not know it very well, and instead Spanish is your first language, we should be making critical documents available in the language that is comfortable for you.
True.
Or if you've started a business in our city and you speak English less than very well, if you're going to go to the treasurer to pay taxes or to find out anything that you might need related to business or your home or anything, we now have devices that are available in those locations that have hundreds of languages available. And you talking to someone who works for the city, you can look at a flag and say, that's the flag for my country, and it'll pull up your language that you need to be translated into. And you and I can have a conversation where I'm getting the information in the language that makes me feel most comfortable and confident. And this other person who works for the city can be speaking it in English, and that information is being translated, right? We recognize that accessibility, again, isn't just physical, but it is that language barrier. We're trying to remove that barrier, right? Especially as we become a more and more global city. And so those are the things that we're really trying to think about. All of the ways, one of our slogans, and our biggest slogan is Norfolk welcomes everyone. And we say that knowing that people don't always feel welcome, and that our work daily is to figure out what else could we be doing, what else should we be doing to make someone feel welcome. And so if you come into our space, if you come into City Hall and we're not even making sure that we can understand what you're saying to us or provide you resources, you're not going to feel very welcome, right? You're not going to feel like, the city really cares about me, right? And so we have a number of ways that we're trying to figure out, how do we make folks feel welcome here? How do we create a city that works for everyone? Not just the majority, but really everybody here.
That's amazing. I love that, and it's so good and refreshing to know that there's people like you, or whole departments,
a whole team of folks,
filled with people like yourself who are doing this work. It's super impactful. Wow, we're already 5 minutes left. Is there anything that you want to speak to? Should we talk about your history and how you became? I know this wasn't initially your plan. Could you have envisioned yourself doing the work that you're doing now back in the day?
That's a good question. I would say yes. Let me tell you why. And this will align to just where the world is as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I will say this. We held a conference last year called the Evolve Summit. And one of the things with the Evolve Summit is that we wanted anybody who identified themselves as an impact leader to attend the Evolve Summit. And our idea behind that was that whether your title was tied to diversity, equity, and inclusion or not, there are so many people who have been doing the work of advancing places, of making spaces better, of considering those who have been left out for generations, and their titles weren't tied to D, E, or I, right? And so we wanted to get folks back to this idea that no matter what your title is, take the DEI out of it, you are doing work that's impactful, right? You're doing the work. Like, let's get over all of the politicization. I don't even know if that's the correct way to say that, right? But like, of the acronym, and let's focus on what is the real work. And the real work is making sure that spaces and places are better for those who have historically been left out and those who haven't been considered. So 10 years ago, I was still doing this work, right? It wasn't called diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? It was all under different names. And I've asked so many different people what they were doing so many years ago, right? And their work would still align with us advancing communities. It would still align with making sure that our schools are safe for everyone,
Right.
or that parents who didn't have a comfortable relationship with the school leadership still felt like they have a voice and advocate on behalf of their students. It was still about making sure that industries like the tech industry or that banking made sure that there were spaces available for people of color who have been historically left out through marginalization, like redlining, other programs that were designed to keep you from having wealth, right? And so folks have been doing all kinds of work like this, including myself, before the titles. So to answer your question, I think I could have seen myself doing something similar, because I've always been doing the work of making spaces better for other people, including myself, right? Like making the spaces that I occupy ones that are open for everyone. And so,
where do you think that came from? Like, is that just who you are as a person? You just built like that, or?
So deep down, honestly, I feel like we're all built like that, right? The way that we do it looks different, right? Because it doesn't matter to me whether you're an accountant or an IT professional. There's something about the work that you do is about making places, spaces, systems better, right? Even if the making it better is just so it's more efficient and more effective for the end user, that's still about making it better, right? So I think we all have that in us, and how we tap into it may look a bit differently. And so, but I would say specifically for me, it's what I've always seen. I mean, I just come from a family and a grandmother who, like, that was at her core, right? Making sure that places were better because she was in it. And so, like, that is like core to who I am, right? So whether I'm doing this or if I were a barista, it would be me making sure that the space was better because I was there, you know? Like, that's just, I can, I asked my team a question. We do this thing, connection before content before a meeting. And the question today, one of the questions was like, what was your first job? And I was thinking back to my first job, and I still brought the same person I am today to that, right? And that was at a restaurant in Philadelphia, you know what I mean? And so I'm going to bring that wherever. Yep.
That's so dope. All right, so last question is, what are some of the common misconceptions about DE&I?
So many
especially these days.
I won't even lean into like the most recent misconceptions tied to like horrific events that have happened in our country. But I think folks think it's only about certain segments of our population. Folks have thought it's only been about making spaces better for African Americans, or it's just so we can make sure that our LGBTQ community has access, or that it's only this. I think what folks miss about it is that it's about all of us having a chance and an opportunity, right? And I think what's been used is a way to pit folks against each other so that they feel like you are their enemy, and that if you somehow had access, then that meant that they couldn't have access. And I think that's the greatest misconception, and I think that's being used to continue to put people against each other, and it's been used in a negative way. When the reality, the real work, now I'm not talking about the PR version of the work. The real work, whether it was DEI or something else, the work is and will continue to be, even under a different name, is the idea that historically everybody hasn't had the same opportunities and the same access. And it is our ongoing, that is actual and factual, right? That we will work till our very last day, many folks, to make sure that the historical events that happened that led folks to not have access will not ever happen again, and that we will work tirelessly to make sure that in our policies and our procedures and how we do everything, we are making opportunities available to everyone, no one excluded.
Well, huge thank you from the Blackathon team for being who you are. You know, we look at you guys as the Avengers out here fighting the good fight, you know, until the last day.
We fight on every day.
Yeah. And did you want me to leave your information here for people to contact you, to reach out with any questions?
Sure. That's fine.
Okay, link will be in the description for that. Attend your local city council meetings wherever you are. You heard it here. I'm Lionel the Builder. I'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much.